Marcus Reynolds stood in the center of Courtroom 342, his broad shoulders squared beneath a charcoal suit that had seen better days. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his face as he stared directly at District Attorney William Prescott, a man who'd built his career on high-profile convictions and was already rehearsing his victory speech for this case. The courthouse hummed with tension, the gallery packed with reporters hungry for a headline, and curious onlookers drawn to the spectacle of a man fighting for his freedom. This was supposed to be an open and shut case, a dangerous criminal caught red-handed with irrefutable evidence. At least, that's what the police report claimed. Mr. Reynolds. Prescott's voice cut through the silence, dripping with practiced condescension. Perhaps you'd like to explain to the jury why your fingerprints were found on the murder weapon? Marcus didn't flinch. At 42, he'd faced worse than an overzealous prosecutor with political ambitions. His eyes, deep brown and unreadable, remained fixed on Prescott. "I can't explain something that isn't true," Marcus replied, his voice steady, resonant with a quiet confidence that seemed to puzzle everyone in the courtroom. Prescott smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. He turned to the jury, a carefully selected group who, whether they admitted it or not, had already made up their minds about the man standing before them. The defendant would have us believe that the Chicago Police Department, one of the finest law enforcement agencies in the country, not only made a mistake but deliberately falsified evidence. Prescott paused for effect. "That's quite an accusation, Mr. Reynolds." Marcus's court-appointed attorney, Sarah Chen, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She'd been assigned this case just 3 days ago, not nearly enough time to mount a proper defense against the mountain of evidence the prosecution had assembled. Murder weapon with the defendant's prints, security footage placing him near the scene, a witness who claimed to have seen him fleeing. It was overwhelming. "Objection, Your Honor," Sarah said, rising to her feet. "Mr. Prescott is editorializing." Judge Harriet Monroe, a veteran of the bench with 30 years of experience and a reputation for running a tight courtroom, nodded. Sustained. "Mr. Prescott, stick to questions." Prescott barely acknowledged the rebuke. "Mr. Reynolds, where were you on the night of April 7th between the hours of 10 p.m. and midnight?" Marcus took a breath. "I was at home, alone." "Convenient," Prescott remarked. "No witnesses to corroborate your alibi." "Objection," Sarah called out again. "Withdrawn," Prescott said smoothly before Judge Monroe could respond. He paced in front of the jury box, a predator circling his prey. "Mr. Reynolds, do you have any explanation for why Detective James Mercer and his partner found the murder weapon with your fingerprints on it hidden in your apartment?" A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "They didn't find it in my apartment," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, what was that?" Prescott cupped a hand to his ear theatrically. "They didn't find the weapon in my apartment," Marcus repeated, his voice stronger, "because it was never there." Prescott chuckled, sharing a knowing look with Detective Mercer, who sat smugly at the prosecution table. "So Detective Mercer, a decorated officer with 15 years of service, is lying?" "Yes." The word hung in the air, simple but explosive. The gallery erupted in whispers. Judge Monroe banged her gavel. "Order!" Prescott approached the witness stand, his expression hardening. "Mr. Reynolds, let's be clear. You're claiming that Detective Mercer and Detective Patel entered your home with a search warrant signed by Judge Simmons and then falsified evidence to frame you for the murder of Gregory Washington?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." "And why, pray tell, would they do that?" Marcus looked directly at Detective Mercer. "You'd have to ask them." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Sarah Chen looked down at her notes, desperately searching for something to counter the prosecution's narrative. She'd spent hours with Marcus, trying to understand his insistence on his innocence despite the overwhelming evidence. He seemed so certain, so calm in the face of potential life imprisonment, but he'd provided her with nothing concrete to fight with. "Your Honor," Sarah said, suddenly standing, "may I request a brief recess to confer with my client?" Judge Monroe checked her watch. "We'll take 15 minutes. Court is in recess." As the jury filed out, Sarah grabbed Marcus by the arm and pulled him into a small consultation room adjacent to the courtroom. "What are you doing?" she hissed, closing the door behind them. "We agreed you wouldn't antagonize the detective." Marcus leaned against the wall, his expression unchanged. "I'm telling the truth." "The truth doesn't matter if I can't prove it." Sarah ran a hand through her hair, frustration evident in every movement. "Marcus, they have your fingerprints on the murder weapon. They have security footage of you within a block of the crime scene. They have a witness who claims they saw someone matching your description running from the alley where Washington was killed. The fingerprints were planted. The security footage shows me walking home from my shift at the auto shop, which is in that neighborhood. And the witness?" Marcus shook his head. "The witness is lying." Sarah sighed. "You keep saying that, but you're giving me nothing to work with. I need something concrete, something I can use to create reasonable doubt at the very least." Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying her face as if making a decision. "What if I told you there was a way to prove Detective Mercer is corrupt?" Sarah froze. "What are you talking about?" "Mercer has been on the payroll of the Donovan crime family for years. He's been their inside man, making evidence disappear, tipping them off about raids, and occasionally—" He paused. "Framing innocent people when the family needs a fall guy." "And how exactly would you know this?" Sarah asked, skepticism etched across her face. Marcus straightened, his demeanor shifting subtly. For the first time since she'd met him, Sarah felt a change in the air around him, as if she was suddenly in the presence of someone else entirely. "Because before I was an auto mechanic, I spent 15 years with the Central Intelligence Agency, monitoring domestic organized crime networks that posed national security threats. The Donovan family was one of my assignments." Sarah stared at him, mouth slightly open. "You... what?" "I'm not supposed to disclose this," Marcus continued, his voice lower. "My work was classified, but I'm not going to prison for a crime I didn't commit to protect a cover that doesn't matter anymore." "You expect me to believe you were CIA?" Sarah's voice was incredulous. "Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning?" "Would you have believed me without proof?" Marcus asked. "Besides, I was hoping to handle this without revealing my past. Some habits die hard." Sarah paced the small room. "Even if this is true, how does it help us? We can't just announce you were CIA and expect everyone to take your word for it. There's a secure server at Langley with files on the Donovan family, including surveillance on Mercer taking payments. I have access codes that would prove my identity and give us access to those files." Sarah stopped pacing. "You want to access classified CIA files in the middle of your murder trial?" "I want to prove my innocence and expose a corrupt cop who's been destroying lives for years," Marcus corrected her. "The question is, are you willing to help me?" Before Sarah could answer, there was a knock at the door. "Time's up," called the bailiff. Sarah stared at Marcus, her mind racing. "This is insane," she whispered. "So is going to prison for a murder I didn't commit." His eyes locked with hers. "Make a decision, counselor." The bailiff knocked again, more insistently this time. Sarah took a deep breath. "I'll need those access codes and a way to verify them quickly." For the first time since they'd met, Marcus smiled. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges and revealing a glimpse of the man behind the stoic facade. "I knew I was right about you." They returned to the courtroom. The energy between them changed. The jury had returned to their seats, and Prescott was arranging his notes at the prosecution table, confidence oozing from every pore. Judge Monroe settled into her chair. "Court is back in session. Mr. Prescott, you may continue your cross-examination." Prescott approached the witness stand again, but this time Marcus's posture was different. There was a subtle shift in his demeanor, an alertness that hadn't been there before, like a predator who had been pretending to be prey and had finally tired of the charade. "Mr. Reynolds," Prescott began, "let's return to the matter of the murder weapon found in your apartment." "Your Honor," Sarah interrupted, rising to her feet. "The defense requests permission to introduce new evidence pertinent to this case." Prescott turned, surprised. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Discovery is complete. The defense can't just introduce new evidence mid-trial." Judge Monroe frowned. "Ms. Chen, you know the rules of procedure." "I do, Your Honor," Sarah acknowledged. "But this evidence directly relates to the credibility of the prosecution's key witness, Detective Mercer, and was only just brought to my attention." Judge Monroe considered this for a moment. "Approach the bench, both of you." As Sarah and Prescott moved forward, Marcus sat calmly in the witness box, his eyes now fixed on Detective Mercer. The detective shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. At the bench, Sarah lowered her voice. "Your Honor, I have reason to believe that Detective Mercer falsified evidence in this case because he is being paid by the Donovan crime family. I can prove it, but I need a brief adjournment to secure the evidence." Prescott scoffed. "This is absurd, Your Honor. The defense is desperate and grasping at straws." Judge Monroe looked at Sarah skeptically. "That's a serious accusation, Ms. Chen. What evidence are you referring to?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Digital surveillance records from a classified federal investigation into organized crime. My client has access to these records due to his former position as an intelligence operative." Both Prescott and Judge Monroe stared at her in disbelief. "Ms. Chen," Judge Monroe said slowly, "are you claiming your client, the auto mechanic, was a spy?" "Yes, Your Honor, and those records will prove Detective Mercer framed my client for a murder he didn't commit." As the words left her mouth, the courtroom doors burst open. 3 men in dark suits entered, their presence immediately commanding attention. The lead man approached the bench, showing identification to the bailiff. "Your Honor," he said, his voice authoritative and calm, "I'm Special Agent Thomas Wilson with the FBI. We need to speak with you, the attorneys, and Mr. Reynolds immediately. It's a matter of national security." The courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to Marcus, who remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable. The game had changed, and everyone knew it. The judge's chambers had never felt so crowded. Judge Monroe sat behind her desk, fingers steepled beneath her chin, as she observed the unusual assembly before her. Sarah Chen stood near the window, her legal pad clutched tightly against her chest. District Attorney Prescott paced in small agitated circles, his face flushed with a mixture of confusion and indignation. Detective Mercer had been ordered to wait outside, a fact that clearly bothered Prescott. Special Agent Wilson placed a black leather portfolio on the judge's desk and carefully removed several documents, each bearing the ominous, classified watermark across the top. "Your Honor," Wilson began, his tone measured and official, "what I'm about to share is classified information that falls under national security protocols. Everyone in this room will need to sign non-disclosure agreements before we proceed." "This is preposterous," Prescott interjected, stopping his pacing. "We're in the middle of a murder trial. You can't just waltz in here and—" "Actually, Mr. Prescott, they can," Judge Monroe interrupted. "The federal government has broad authority in matters of national security." She turned her attention back to Agent Wilson. "However, I need to understand how this relates to the case before us." Wilson nodded to one of his colleagues, who distributed the non-disclosure agreements. "Once these are signed, I'll explain everything. Marcus Reynolds sat quietly in the corner, his eyes never leaving Agent Wilson. There was a familiarity in his gaze, not of personal recognition, but of professional assessment. He was reading Wilson the way only someone with training would. After the documents were signed, Wilson pulled out a secure tablet and placed it on the desk. Marcus Reynolds, he began, pulling up a personnel file with a photo of a younger Marcus in military dress, served as a deep-cover operative for the Central Intelligence Agency from 2003 to 2018. His primary focus was infiltrating and gathering intelligence on domestic crime organizations with international connections that pose threats to national security. The room fell silent. Sarah glanced at Marcus, who remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged. Mr. Reynolds' last assignment before his retirement was monitoring the Donovan family's connections to Eastern European weapons trafficking, Wilson continued. During this operation, he identified several corrupt law enforcement officials on the Donovan payroll, including, he paused, pulling up another file, Detective James Mercer of the Chicago Police Department. Prescott's face went pale. This can't be right. Wilson ignored him, turning to Judge Monroe. Your Honor, the Bureau has been building its own case against members of the Donovan organization and their law enforcement accomplices for the past 18 months. When Mr. Reynolds was arrested for Gregory Washington's murder, it triggered several security protocols because we know he's being framed. Sarah stepped forward. So you have evidence that my client is innocent? We have evidence that Detective Mercer has been falsifying reports, planting evidence, and intimidating witnesses for the Donovan family for years, Wilson clarified. And we have reason to believe the murder of Gregory Washington was ordered by Michael Donovan himself. Why? Judge Monroe asked, leaning forward. What was Washington's connection to the Donovans? For the first time, Marcus spoke. Gregory was my informant. All eyes turned to him. I may have officially retired from the agency, but some contacts remained in place. Gregory worked as a driver for the Donovans. He'd been feeding me information about their new operations. Marcus's voice was soft but clear. Someone made him. The Donovans had him killed, and Mercer made sure I took the fall. Two problems solved at once. Prescott collapsed into a chair, his worldview visibly crumbling. I've built this entire case on evidence provided by Mercer. Evidence that was fabricated, Wilson confirmed. The fingerprints on the murder weapon were lifted from a coffee cup in Mr. Reynolds' auto shop and transferred using specialized equipment. The witness was paid to lie, and the security footage was selectively edited to remove the actual perpetrator, a Donovan hitman named Victor Kozlov. Judge Monroe removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. Agent Wilson, while I appreciate this information, I need to understand what you're asking of this court. We're asking for the charges against Marcus Reynolds to be dismissed, and for Detective Mercer to be taken into federal custody immediately. We're prepared to arrest him as he leaves this room. Prescott looked up, his face ashen. There will need to be a formal motion to dismiss. I can't just file it, Judge Monroe said firmly. Now. Your Honor, there are procedures. I'm aware of the procedures, Mr. Prescott. She cut him off, her voice sharp. But I'm not going to allow this charade to continue for one more minute. An innocent man is on trial while the actual criminals walk free. File the motion. Prescott nodded weakly, defeated. Wilson turned to Marcus. Mr. Reynolds, we'll need you to come with us as well. Your protection is now a priority, and we'll need your testimony against both Mercer and the Donovans. Marcus stood, straightening his suit jacket. Of course. Wait, Sarah interjected. As Mr. Reynolds' attorney, I need assurances about his safety and legal status. He's still technically in custody. Not for long, Judge Monroe stated. I'm dismissing all charges against Mr. Reynolds with prejudice. The state cannot refile. She fixed Prescott with a hard stare. daring him to object. He didn't. Wilson nodded toward the door. We should move quickly. The longer we remain here, the greater the risk that Mercer will suspect something is wrong. They filed out of the judge's chambers, an unusual procession returning to a courtroom now thick with tension and speculation. As they entered, all eyes turned to them. The gallery buzzed with whispers. Detective Mercer straightened in his seat, sensing something had changed. Judge Monroe took her place at the bench, her expression severe. "Court is back in session," she announced, her gavel striking with finality. Marcus returned to the witness stand, his demeanor subtly altered. The facade of the simple mechanic had fallen away, revealing glimpses of the trained operative underneath. Sarah noticed the change immediately, the way he surveyed the room, how his posture shifted to allow for quicker movement if necessary, how his attention remained fixed on Mercer while still monitoring the entrances and exits. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Monroe addressed the courtroom, "based on new evidence that has come to light, I am dismissing all charges against Marcus Reynolds with prejudice." The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the doors, eager to break the story. Spectators turned to each other in confusion. The jury looked bewildered. "Order!" Judge Monroe's gavel came down again. "I am also ordering the immediate detention of Detective James Mercer for questioning in relation to evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and obstruction of justice." Mercer's face drained of color. His hand moved toward his hip where his service weapon would normally be, but it had been checked at the courthouse entrance. His eyes darted around the room, calculating, desperate. Two of Wilson's agents moved toward him, hands hovering near their concealed weapons. "Detective Mercer," one of them said calmly, "please stand and place your hands behind your back." For a moment it seemed Mercer might resist. His eyes locked with Marcus's, hatred burning in them. Then, in a sudden burst of movement, he bolted toward a side door. "Stop him!" Wilson shouted. Chaos erupted in the courtroom. People screamed and ducked for cover. The bailiff moved to intercept, but Mercer was faster, driving his shoulder into the man's chest and sending him sprawling. Marcus moved with a speed and precision that left Sarah breathless. He vaulted over the witness stand and cut across the courtroom, intercepting Mercer just as he reached the door. With a series of fluid movements, he had the detective pinned against the wall, arm twisted behind his back. "Going somewhere, James?" Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying in the now silent room. Wilson's agents quickly took over, cuffing Mercer and reading him his rights. As they led him away, Mercer twisted to glare at Marcus one last time. "You think this is over?" he spat. "The Donovans will never let you testify. You're dead, Reynolds. Dead." Marcus watched him go, his expression impassive. When he turned back to the courtroom, he found every eye on him, some with fear, others with awe, but all with new understanding. This was not the man they had believed him to be just hours earlier. Judge Monroe adjourned the court, and the room gradually emptied, reporters rushing to file their stories about the dramatic turn of events. Soon, only Marcus, Sarah, and Agent Wilson remained. "That was quite an entrance back there," Sarah said, gathering her files. "I thought ex-spies were supposed to be more subtle." A ghost of a smile touched Marcus's lips. "Sometimes subtlety isn't an option." Wilson approached, his expression serious. "We need to move you to a secure location immediately. The Donovans will know what happened here within the hour, if they don't already." Marcus nodded. "I've been expecting this day for a long time, Agent Wilson. I'm ready." Sarah looked between them, suddenly aware that she was witnessing the beginning of something much larger than a single murder trial. "What happens now?" "Now," Wilson said, "we take down the entire Donovan organization, and your client is the key." Marcus turned to Sarah, extending his hand. "Thank you for believing me when no one else would." She took his hand, feeling the strength and purpose in his grip. "I'm not sure I ever had a choice. There was always something about you that didn't fit the profile." "The professional hazard of living a double life," Marcus replied, his voice tinged with a rare hint of warmth. "Parts of the real you always bleed through." As they prepared to leave the courthouse, Marcus paused, looking back at the empty courtroom one last time. 15 years undercover, he said quietly. "I thought I was done with that life. Seems it wasn't done with me." Wilson checked his watch impatiently. "We need to move. Our transport is waiting." They exited through a secure back entrance where an unmarked SUV with tinted windows waited. 2 agents stood guard, scanning the area with practiced vigilance. "Ms. Chen," Wilson said as they reached the vehicle, "this is where we part ways. For your own safety, the less you know about what happens next, the better." Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Will I see you again?" she asked Marcus, surprised by how much she wanted the answer to be yes. Marcus paused before entering the vehicle. "When this is over," he promised, "there's a story you deserve to hear in full." As the SUV pulled away, Sarah stood alone on the courthouse steps, watching it disappear into Chicago's busy streets. The case file in her hands suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the real story that was unfolding, a story of corruption, betrayal, and a man who had sacrificed his identity in service to his country, only to find himself fighting for his life against the very system he had sworn to protect. Little did she know, Marcus Reynolds's revelation in the courtroom was just the beginning. The real storm was about to break, and when it did, no one in Chicago would be left untouched. The safe house was tucked away in the northern suburbs of Chicago, a modest 2-story home with a well-maintained lawn that blended perfectly with the surrounding neighborhood. Nothing about its appearance suggested it was now the command center for a major federal operation, and that was precisely the point. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee cooling in front of him, as he reviewed the files Agent Wilson had provided. Photos of known Donovan associates were spread across the surface, many of whom Marcus recognized from his years of surveillance. Some faces were new, evidence that the organization had continued to evolve after his retirement. "The Donovans have expanded significantly in the last 3 years," Wilson explained, pointing to a series of surveillance photos. "What started as a relatively contained operation in Chicago has now spread to Milwaukee, Detroit, and even parts of Canada. They've moved beyond weapons trafficking into money laundering through legitimate businesses, high-end art theft, and political influence." Marcus picked up a photo of Michael Donovan, the family patriarch. At 67, his silver hair and tailored suits gave him the appearance of a distinguished businessman rather than one of the most dangerous crime bosses in the Midwest. "Michael was always careful," Marcus said, studying the image, "never directly involved in the day-to-day operations, always maintaining plausible deniability. What changed?" Wilson pulled out another file. His son, Anthony, graduated from Wharton 5 years ago, came back to join the family business with big ideas about expansion and modernization. He's been pushing the organization into new territories, taking risks his father would have avoided. Marcus nodded, the pieces falling into place. "And Gregory Washington? How did he fit into all this?" "Your informant was Anthony's driver for the past 2 years. He had access to conversations, meetings, schedules, information that would have been invaluable to our investigation." Wilson's expression darkened. His murder wasn't just about silencing a leak. It was a message to anyone else who might be thinking about talking. The door to the kitchen opened and Sarah Chen entered, looking somewhat out of place in the FBI operation, but determined nonetheless. Wilson had reluctantly agreed to include her in the briefing, acknowledging that her knowledge of the case and her relationship with Marcus could be valuable. "Sorry I'm late," she said, setting down her briefcase. The press is camped outside my office. Everyone wants the inside story on the CIA spy masquerading as a mechanic. Marcus raised an eyebrow. That's the headline they're going with? One of the tamer ones, Sarah replied, taking a seat at the table. You're trending on social media. There are already conspiracy theories about why you were really in Chicago. Perfect, Wilson muttered. Just what we need. Public attention. Marcus turned his attention back to the files. We need to focus on what matters. Mercer is in custody, but he's just one piece of the puzzle. The Donovans will have contingency plans, other officers on their payroll. We've identified 3 other potential corrupt officials, Wilson confirmed, sliding forward another file. A sergeant in narcotics, a detective in vice, and possibly even an assistant district attorney. Sarah's head snapped up. Someone in the DA's office? Who? Wilson hesitated. We're still gathering evidence. We can't make accusations without solid proof. Marcus studied Sarah's reaction. You suspect someone, don't you? She nodded slowly. There have been cases, organized crime cases that seemed airtight, that fell apart for seemingly minor procedural reasons. I always thought it was just bad luck or oversight, but now... We need names, Wilson pressed. Richard Thornton, Sarah said finally. He's been with the office for nearly a decade, handles most of the high-profile organized crime cases. He's respected, considered untouchable, but what? Marcus prompted. There's always been something off about which cases he chooses to pursue aggressively and which ones he lets slide with plea deals, Sarah explained. Nothing obvious enough to raise red flags, just a pattern that never made sense to me. Wilson made a note in his file. We'll look into him. In the meantime, we need to focus on building our case against the Donovans themselves. A knock at the door interrupted them. One of Wilson's agents entered, his expression tense. Sir, we just received word. Detective Mercer was found dead in his holding cell 30 minutes ago. Apparent suicide. The room fell silent. Marcus and Wilson exchanged knowing looks. Suicide, Marcus repeated, his tone making it clear he didn't believe it for a second. Let me guess, hanged himself with his bedsheet? The agent nodded grimly. The Donovans are tying up loose ends, Marcus said, pushing back from the table. Mercer knew too much, was too much of a liability once he was in custody. How? Wilson demanded. He was in federal holding under constant surveillance. Someone on the inside, Marcus stated flatly. The Donovans' reach is greater than you realize, Agent Wilson. This isn't just about corrupt cops anymore. They have people everywhere. Sarah looked between them, the full gravity of the situation sinking in. If they could get to Mercer in federal custody, then nowhere is truly safe, is it? Neither man answered, which was answer enough. Marcus stood, pacing the kitchen. We need to accelerate our timeline. The longer we wait, the more time they have to cover their tracks and eliminate witnesses. Wilson nodded in agreement. What do you suggest? Marcus turned, his eyes sharp with purpose. I go back in. Absolutely not, Wilson objected immediately. You're a key witness in our case. Your testimony is essential for... My testimony won't matter if all the other evidence disappears. Marcus cut him off. Think about it, Wilson. I spent 5 years embedded with the Donovans. They trusted me once as Marcus Smith, the ex-military mechanic who fixed their cars and kept his mouth shut. I can use that identity to get close again. Sarah stood as well. That's insane. They just framed you for murder. If they recognize you... They won't, Marcus assured her. My cover was deep. The only person who knew my real identity was my handler at the CIA and Gregory Washington, who's now dead. To the Donovans, Marcus Reynolds is just some poor guy their cop framed for a murder. They have no reason to connect him to Marcus Smith. Wilson considered this, clearly torn between the potential intelligence gain and the risk. Even if you could get back in, what's the plan? What information are we looking for specifically? Evidence that ties Michael and Anthony Donovan directly to criminal activity, Marcus explained. Bank records, meeting recordings, anything that places them at the scene or giving orders, the kind of evidence they'd never let out of their sight. And how do you plan to access this evidence? Wilson asked skeptically. Marcus smiled, a cold, determined expression that reminded everyone in the room of exactly who he was. By becoming indispensable again, by making them trust me with their secrets. You're talking about a long-term undercover operation, Wilson pointed out. We don't have that kind of time. We don't need long-term, Marcus countered. The Donovans are already on edge. Mercer's arrest and subsequent death will have them scrambling, making mistakes. I just need to be there when they do. A tense silence filled the room as Wilson weighed the proposal. Finally, he sighed. I need to clear this with my superiors. It's unorthodox, to say the least. Do what you need to do, Marcus replied. But we're losing time. As Wilson left the room to make his calls, Sarah moved closer to Marcus, her voice low. Are you really sure about this? After everything you've been through, going back into that world? Marcus's expression softened slightly. I spent 15 years living double lives, Sarah. In some ways, it's more familiar to me than the life I've been trying to build since I retired. That's what worries me, she admitted. What if you can't come back this time? Before Marcus could respond, Wilson returned, his face grim but resolved. It's approved conditionally. You'll have emergency extraction protocols, and you'll report to me directly, no one else. Marcus nodded. When do we start? Tonight, Wilson said. We need to establish your cover story quickly. As far as the world knows, Marcus Reynolds was released after charges were dropped due to evidence mishandling. No mention of the CIA, no mention of the Donovans. And what about me? Sarah asked. What's my role in all this? Wilson and Marcus exchanged glances. You've already done more than enough, Marcus began. Sarah crossed her arms. I didn't ask what I've done. I asked what my role is going forward. Marcus couldn't help but smile at her determination. She has a point, Wilson. She knows the legal angles, has legitimate reasons to follow up on what happened to her client. She could be valuable. Wilson sighed heavily. Fine. Ms. Chen, you'll act as our legal consultant and liaison. You'll maintain your normal routine, but you'll feed us any information you come across through secure channels. But understand this, if at any point I determine your involvement puts the operation at risk, you're out. No arguments. Sarah nodded, accepting the terms. Understood. As night fell, the safe house became a hive of activity. Agents came and went, equipment was set up, and Marcus's transformation began. His expensive suit was replaced with worn jeans and a faded work shirt. His clean-shaven face gave way to subtle stubble. Even his posture changed, the military precision softening into something more casual, more ordinary. Sarah watched the metamorphosis with fascination. It's remarkable, she observed. You really do become someone else. That's the job, Marcus replied simply. Become who you need to be to get what you need to get. Wilson approached, holding a small case. Comms equipment, he explained, opening it to reveal what looked like ordinary items. A watch, a cell phone, even a set of keys. Each one contains tracking devices and emergency signal capabilities. The phone is secure and will route through multiple proxies before reaching us. Marcus examined each item carefully before pocketing them. What's my way in? O'Malley's, Wilson said, referring to a bar known to be a Donovan hangout. Anthony's right-hand man, Paul Grissom, is a regular. We've arranged for your release story to be all over the local news tonight. If the Donovans are as thorough as you say, they'll be watching for any fallout from the Mercer situation. Marcus nodded. They'll want to know if I'm a threat if I know anything about why I was really framed. Exactly, Wilson confirmed. Your job is to convince them you're just an innocent mechanic who got caught in something you don't understand and want nothing more than to put it behind you. The final preparations were made as midnight approached. Marcus stood at the door, now fully transformed into his old cover identity. Sarah approached him one last time. "Be careful," she said simply. Marcus held her gaze. "Always am." With that, he stepped out into the night, leaving behind Marcus Reynolds and becoming once again Marcus Smith, the mechanic with a past no one would suspect, a man about to walk deliberately into the lion's den, armed only with his wits and years of training. As the door closed behind him, Sarah turned to Wilson. "Will this work?" The agent's face was grim. "It has to. Because if it doesn't, we lose our best chance at bringing down one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the country. And Marcus Reynolds, he loses a lot more than that." Outside, Marcus disappeared into the shadows of Chicago, a ghost returning to haunt those who thought they'd buried him, a weapon pointed directly at the heart of the Donovan Empire. The game had begun again. O'Malley's was exactly as Marcus remembered it. Dim lighting that cast long shadows across worn wooden floors, the acrid smell of stale beer and cigarettes that clung to every surface despite the citywide smoking ban, and the persistent hum of conversations just quiet enough that you couldn't make out the words unless you were part of them. This was Donovan territory, had been for nearly 20 years. Marcus pushed through the door at 11:30 p.m., just late enough that the regular crowd would be settled in, but early enough that no one would be too drunk to notice his arrival. He wore his cover identity like a second skin, the slightly hunched shoulders of a man who worked with his hands for a living, the cautious gaze that never lingered too long on any one person, the deliberate way he ordered his drink, a whiskey neat, placing the exact change on the bar without a word. He took a seat at the far end of the bar, angled so he could see both the entrance and the mirror behind the liquor bottles, giving him a nearly complete view of the room. Paul Grissom was already there, holding court at a corner table with 3 other men Marcus recognized as low-level Donovan enforcers. Grissom hadn't changed much in 3 years, still wore his dark hair slicked back, still had that permanent sneer that made him look like he was perpetually smelling something unpleasant. Marcus didn't look at them directly. That wasn't the play. Instead, he sipped his whiskey slowly, his movements weary, his expression that of a man who had been through hell and just wanted to forget. A performance, but one rooted in enough truth to be convincing. It took exactly 12 minutes before Grissom noticed him. Marcus felt the man's gaze before he saw it reflected in the mirror, a sharp, assessing look that traveled from Marcus's worn boots to his faded Cubs cap. Recognition flickered across Grissom's face, followed immediately by suspicion. Marcus continued to nurse his drink, pretending not to notice. The groundwork had been laid. Now he just had to wait. He didn't have to wait long. "Well, look who it is." Grissom's voice carried across the bar as he approached, all swagger and bravado. "Marcus Smith, right? Haven't seen you around in a while." Marcus turned slowly, his expression carefully neutral. "Been busy," he replied, his voice rough from disuse. Not in a good way. Grissom leaned against the bar, studying him with undisguised curiosity. "Yeah, I heard. Caught some bad luck with the cops, didn't you? Was all over the news." Marcus took another sip of his whiskey, letting the burn linger before he responded. "Something like that." "Must have been quite the experience," Grissom pressed, fishing for information. "Getting charged with murder, spending time in lockup, then suddenly walking free." Marcus met his gaze evenly. "Nothing sudden about it. Cop was dirty, framed me." He shrugged as if it were that simple. "Justice system worked for once, I guess." Grissom's eyes narrowed slightly. "That so?" And what about the Fed who came to your rescue? The one they're not talking about on the news? And there it was. The real question. The reason for this conversation. The Donovans wanted to know if Marcus understood why he'd been framed, if he knew about their connection to Mercer, if he posed a threat. Marcus scoffed, downing the rest of his whiskey and signaling the bartender for another. Rescue? Is that what they're saying? Man, all I know is 1 minute I'm facing life in prison for something I didn't do. Next minute some suits show up saying they've got evidence the cop who arrested me was crooked. He leaned in, lowering his voice. Between you and me, I think they just didn't want a lawsuit. Easier to let me go than deal with a wrongful imprisonment case. Grissom relaxed slightly, but the wariness hadn't left his eyes. And now what? You just picking up where you left off? Back to fixing cars? That's the plan, Marcus confirmed. Shop's still there, landlord held my lease. Something about believing in my innocence. He shook his head. Truth is, he couldn't find another tenant willing to pay what I was paying. The bartender placed a fresh whiskey in front of Marcus. Before he could reach for it, Grissom put a hand on his wrist. This one's on me, he said, nodding to the bartender. Consider it a welcome-back gift. Marcus nodded his thanks, taking a small sip. Appreciate it. Grissom studied him for a moment longer before making his decision. You know, we've got a few cars that could use a good mechanic's touch. Nothing fancy, just maintenance stuff the dealerships overcharge for. I could take a look, Marcus offered, keeping his tone casual, uninterested. Shop's not exactly busy right now, could use the work. Grissom pulled out his phone, tapping quickly. I'll text you the address. Bring your tools tomorrow, say around noon. Marcus nodded, feeling the phantom buzz of his own phone receiving the message. I'll be there. Grissom rejoined his companions, and Marcus remained at the bar for another 45 minutes, just long enough to finish his drink at a natural pace and leave without drawing attention. As he stepped out into the cool night air, he allowed himself a single deep breath. The first contact had been made, the hook baited. Now he just had to wait for them to bite. Across town, Sarah Chen sat in her apartment, surrounded by case files and legal pads covered in notes. The television played softly in the background, a local news station replaying footage of Marcus leaving the courthouse earlier that day. The carefully crafted story, a man wrongfully accused, freed after evidence of police corruption came to light, was being repeated on every channel. Her phone rang, the screen displaying unknown caller. She answered immediately, knowing who it would be. Chen, she said tersely. He's in. Wilson's voice came through, equally terse. First contact established with Grissom at O'Malley's. They've arranged a meeting for tomorrow. Sarah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was fast. They're curious about him, Wilson explained, which means they're worried. That's good for us. And bad for Marcus if they decide he knows too much, Sarah pointed out. Wilson's silence was telling. I've been looking into Richard Thornton, Sarah continued, changing the subject. Pulled every case file where he was lead prosecutor against Donovan Associates. The pattern is clearer than I thought. Key witnesses recanting, evidence going missing, charges reduced at the last minute. It's all there if you know what to look for. Can you document it? Wilson asked. Build a timeline? Already on it, Sarah confirmed. But there's something else. Thornton is scheduled to try a case next week against a Donovan lieutenant named Victor Merrick, weapons trafficking charges. But based on what I'm seeing, those charges will probably be reduced to simple possession before it ever reaches a jury. Unless we stop it, Wilson mused. This could be an opportunity. Keep digging, Chen, and be careful. If Thornton is on their payroll, he has resources and connections. The line went dead, and Sarah turned back to her files, her determination renewed. She wasn't a field agent or an operative, but she had skills they needed, and she intended to use them. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the address Grissom had texted him, a nondescript warehouse in an industrial area on the city's west side. He parked his battered pickup truck outside, a vehicle Wilson's team had procured to match his cover identity, and grabbed his toolbox from the back. The large metal door rolled up as he approached, revealing Grissom waiting inside, alongside 2 luxury sedans and an SUV. "Right on time," Grissom noted, checking his watch. "I like that in a mechanic." Marcus nodded, scanning the space with practiced casualness. The warehouse was mostly empty except for the vehicles and some storage crates stacked against the far wall. 2 men stood by a side door, their posture and the bulges beneath their jackets making it clear they were armed. "Nice setup," Marcus commented, moving toward the first car, a black Mercedes S-Class. "What seems to be the problem?" "Warning light keeps coming on," Grissom explained. "Dealer wants $3,000 to fix it. Said something about the electronics." Marcus popped the hood and leaned in, his hands moving with the certainty of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't part of his cover. Before the CIA, before everything else, Marcus had actually been a mechanic in the Army. Those skills had served him well when constructing his undercover identity. As he worked, the familiar rhythm of diagnosing and fixing mechanical issues calmed his mind, allowing part of his attention to remain aware of his surroundings. He caught snippets of conversation between Grissom and one of the guards, mentions of a shipment coming in that night, concerns about increased federal presence in the area. "Your sensor's fried," Marcus announced after about 20 minutes. "Common problem with this model. I can replace it for about 400 parts and labor." Grissom looked impressed despite himself. "That's it?" Dealer made it sound like the whole damn computer system needed replacing. Marcus shrugged. "They always do. It's how they make their money." For the next few hours, Marcus worked on all 3 vehicles, identifying issues and fixing what he could with the tools he had brought. It was honest work, straightforward, and he found himself slipping into the comfort of it almost too easily. A reminder of why this cover had been so effective the first time. As he was finishing up with the SUV, the side door opened, and Anthony Donovan walked in. Marcus recognized him immediately, though he looked different from the surveillance photos, more confident, more dangerous. The Harvard graduate had fully embraced his role in the family business. Grissom straightened immediately. "Boss," he acknowledged, "this is the mechanic I was telling you about. Marcus Smith." Anthony approached, his expensive Italian loafers clicking against the concrete floor. He was dressed immaculately in a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month, his dark hair styled perfectly. On the surface, he looked like any other successful young businessman. Only his eyes gave him away, cold, calculating, assessing everything and everyone for their value. "Smith," Anthony said, extending his hand. "Paul tells me you're good with your hands." Marcus wiped his hand on a rag before shaking Anthony's. "Just doing my job." Anthony smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I appreciate a man who knows his craft, especially one who understands discretion." The implication was clear. This was a test, a way to gauge not just Marcus's skills but his willingness to keep his mouth shut. "I mind my own business," Marcus replied simply. "Always have." Anthony nodded, satisfied for the moment. "And that business that kept you away recently, with the police, that's all settled?" Marcus closed the hood of the SUV with a definitive thunk. "Far as I'm concerned, it never happened. Just want to get back to work." "Understandable," Anthony said, watching him carefully. "We all want to move forward. Speaking of which, I have some other vehicles that need more specialized attention. Private collection, you might say. Interested? This was it, the real offer, the deeper access Marcus had been hoping for. Depends on the work and the pay, he answered, keeping his tone neutral. But yeah, I could be available. Anthony smiled again, more genuine this time. Excellent. Paul will be in touch with the details. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Smith? The work requires absolute confidentiality. I trust that won't be a problem. Marcus met his gaze steadily. Never has been before. After Anthony left, Grissom approached with an envelope. Your payment for today, cash, as discussed. Marcus took it without counting, tucking it into his pocket. Same number if you need me again. For now, Grissom replied cryptically. We'll be in touch. As Marcus drove away from the warehouse, he kept his expression neutral despite the satisfaction he felt. The first real step had been taken. He was back in, not fully trusted yet, but on the path. Now he just had to stay alive long enough to find the evidence they needed. 3 days passed before Marcus heard from Grissom again. 3 days of maintaining his cover, reopening his auto shop, serving the occasional customer, and waiting. Patience had been drilled into him during his CIA training. The ability to stay in character for days, weeks, even months without breaking was essential for deep cover operatives. Still, each passing hour heightened the tension, the knowledge that the Donovans were likely running their own investigation on him, verifying his story, looking for inconsistencies. When his phone finally buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, Marcus felt a flicker of relief beneath his carefully maintained composure. Tonight, 10 p.m., same location. Come alone. The message itself was standard, curt, vague enough to be deniable if intercepted, but the timing was significant. The Donovans conducted most of their important business late at night, when the city's attention was elsewhere. Whatever Anthony wanted him to see, it wasn't just routine maintenance. Marcus sent a brief acknowledgement and slipped his phone back into his pocket. He glanced at the clock on the shop wall, 4:30 p.m., time enough to close up shop, check in with Wilson, and prepare for whatever awaited him. At precisely 9:58 p.m., Marcus pulled up to the warehouse. This time, there was no open door waiting for him, just a guard posted outside who gave him a cursory pat-down before escorting him inside. The warehouse interior had been transformed since his last visit. The empty space was now filled with vehicles, not the luxury sedans he'd worked on before, but a collection of nondescript vans and SUVs with reinforced frames and custom modifications. Anthony Donovan stood in the center of the room, flanked by Grissom and 2 other men Marcus didn't recognize. All of them were dressed in expensive suits despite the late hour, as if they'd just come from a business meeting. Smith, Anthony greeted him with that same calculating smile. Glad you could make it. Marcus nodded, his eyes already professionally assessing the vehicles. These are what you wanted me to look at? Among other things, Anthony replied enigmatically. He gestured for Marcus to follow him toward the far end of the warehouse. They stopped in front of a panel van with blacked-out windows and what appeared to be standard delivery company markings on the side. To the untrained eye, it looked like any service vehicle on the roads of Chicago, but Marcus immediately spotted the subtle reinforcements around the wheel wells, the custom exhaust system, the slightly thicker windows. What do you see? Anthony asked, watching Marcus closely. Marcus circled the van slowly, taking his time, letting his expertise speak for itself. Reinforced suspension, hidden compartments probably in the floor and walls. Engine's been modified, I'm guessing for speed, not fuel efficiency. He crouched down, examining the undercarriage. Custom work, but not amateur. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Anthony exchanged a look with Grissom, clearly impressed. And what would you say this vehicle is designed for? It was a test, and they both knew it. Marcus straightened up, meeting Anthony's gaze directly. Transportation, moving things that people don't want found, from places they don't want to be connected to. Anthony smiled more genuinely this time. Exactly right. And that's where you come in, Smith. These vehicles need to be maintained, upgraded, kept in perfect working condition. Mechanical failure isn't an option in our line of work. Marcus nodded, understanding perfectly what was being asked of him. I can handle that, but I'm guessing there's more to it than just routine maintenance. Perceptive, Anthony acknowledged. We have specific modifications we need for upcoming projects, specialized compartments, reinforced areas, systems that won't appear on any standard inspection. I'd need the right equipment, a secure location, Marcus pointed out. My shop's too public for this kind of work. Already taken care of, Anthony replied. He gestured to a door on the far side of the warehouse. There's a fully equipped garage through there. State-of-the-art tools, hydraulic lifts, everything you need. It will be your workspace for these projects. Marcus followed Anthony through the door into what could only be described as a mechanic's dream, a pristine garage space with equipment that would make most professional shops envious. The message was clear. The Donovans were investing in him, bringing him into their operation in a significant way. When do you need me to start? Marcus asked, running his hand appreciatively over a professional toolbox. Tomorrow, Anthony replied. We have a tight schedule, and the first shipment is moving next week. Shipment of what? Anthony's expression cooled instantly. That's not your concern, Smith. You fix the vehicles, make the modifications we ask for, and get paid very well for your discretion. Everything else is need to know. Marcus nodded, backing off immediately. Understood. I was just thinking about weight distribution, suspension adjustments. Different cargo requires different handling. Anthony relaxed slightly. Of course, Grissom will provide you with the specifications. For now, just know that durability and reliability are our primary concerns. As they walked back into the main area, the door to the warehouse opened, and Michael Donovan entered. Unlike his son, the elder Donovan dressed more conservatively, his suit expensive but understated. In his late 60s, he moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to respect and obedience, his silver hair and patrician features giving him the appearance of a distinguished businessman rather than one of Chicago's most dangerous criminals. The atmosphere in the warehouse shifted instantly. Even Anthony straightened his posture as his father approached, the power dynamics obvious to anyone watching. Father, Anthony greeted him with a nod. This is Marcus Smith, the mechanic I told you about. Michael's piercing blue eyes assessed Marcus with an intensity that belied his age. Smith, my son speaks highly of your skills. I appreciate the opportunity, sir, Marcus replied, deliberately deferential, but not subservient. His cover identity would respect power, but not grovel before it. Michael continued to study him for a moment longer before turning back to his son. Is everything on schedule for next week? Yes, sir, Anthony confirmed. Smith here will ensure the vehicles are prepared to your specifications. Michael nodded, apparently satisfied. Good. Remember, we can't afford any complications this time. The buyers are already nervous after the Washington situation. Marcus kept his face carefully neutral at the mention of Gregory Washington, his murdered informant, but his mind raced to catalog this new information. Buyers. A shipment. Whatever the Donovans were moving next week was significant enough to warrant the patriarch's personal attention. Smith, Michael addressed him directly. My son tells me you had some trouble with the police recently. A misunderstanding that's been resolved, Marcus replied evenly. Resolved indeed, Michael mused. Detective Mercer was found dead in his cell, did you hear? The question was casual, but Marcus recognized the trap immediately. I saw something about it on the news. Suicide, they said. Michael's lips curved in a cold smile. The system has a way of cleaning up its own messes, doesn't it? I wouldn't know, sir, Marcus replied carefully. I'm just glad to be moving on with my life. Michael studied him for a moment longer, then nodded slightly. We value loyalty and discretion, Smith. Demonstrate both, and you'll find this arrangement very profitable. Disappoint us. He let the threat hang unspoken. I understand, Marcus assured him. See that you do. With that, Michael turned to his son. Anthony, a word in private. As father and son moved away, Grissom approached Marcus. You just passed the first test, he said quietly. The old man doesn't waste time on people he doesn't see potential in. Good to know, Marcus replied. What's next? Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Be here ready to work. We'll go over the specifications then. Grissom handed him a key card. This gets you in the side entrance, don't lose it. After a few more minutes of conversation, Marcus was dismissed. He drove away from the warehouse, taking a circuitous route back to ensure he wasn't being followed. Before pulling into an empty parking lot where a nondescript sedan was waiting, Agent Wilson sat behind the wheel, window rolled down. Well? Marcus slid into the passenger seat. I'm in. They've set me up with a workspace in the warehouse, want me modifying transport vehicles for some kind of shipment next week. Wilson's expression tightened. Any indication what the shipment is? Nothing specific, but Michael Donovan mentioned buyers who are nervous after the Washington situation. My guess, weapons, high-end, military grade. That tracks with our intelligence. Wilson nodded. We've been picking up chatter about a major arms deal, but couldn't pinpoint the date or location. Well, now we know it's happening next week, Marcus said. And I'll be in the perfect position to gather the details we need. Wilson handed Marcus a small device disguised as a USB drive. New comms equipment. This will allow you to transmit data directly to us without having to make these rendezvous. Too risky to keep meeting like this. Marcus pocketed the device. Any word from Sarah? She's making progress on the Thornton angle, Wilson replied. Found some interesting connections between cases he's prosecuted and the Donovans' financial interests. Also, she's been monitoring his recent communications. He's scheduled a private meeting with Anthony Donovan tomorrow at a restaurant downtown, supposedly to discuss a plea deal for Victor Merrick. That's not suspicious at all, Marcus remarked dryly. We'll have surveillance on them, Wilson assured him. But our real break will come from whatever you can find in that warehouse. Think you can plant some surveillance equipment while you're working on those vehicles? Marcus considered the layout he'd seen. Possible, but risky. They likely sweep for bugs regularly. Better if I focus on gathering intel on the shipment directly. Routes, destinations, contents. That's what will give us the leverage we need. Wilson nodded in agreement. All right. Just be careful. These people killed your informant and framed you for it without hesitation. They won't think twice about eliminating you if they become suspicious. I know the risks, Marcus replied, his voice even. But this is our best shot at taking down the entire organization, not just a few foot soldiers. As they parted ways, Marcus couldn't help but feel the weight of what lay ahead. He was walking back into the darkness he'd spent the last 3 years trying to escape, becoming again the man he'd hoped to leave behind. But the alternative, letting the Donovans continue their operation unchecked, letting Gregory Washington's murder go unpunished, was unacceptable. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The upscale Italian restaurant on Michigan Avenue buzzed with lunchtime activity, the clink of silverware against fine china mingling with the murmur of business conversations and social gossip. Sarah Chen sat alone at a corner table, a half-eaten salad in front of her, and a case file partially concealed by her napkin. She was positioned with a clear view of a private dining room at the back, its frosted glass doors currently closed. Inside that room, Assistant District Attorney Richard Thornton was meeting with Anthony Donovan under the pretense of discussing a plea deal for one of Donovan's associates. At least that was the official story Thornton had given his office. Sarah checked her watch. They had been in there for nearly 40 minutes. Her phone sat on the table beside her water glass, its camera surreptitiously angled toward the private room. The device was running specialized FBI software that would capture and enhance images of anyone entering or exiting. Wilson had provided it to her that morning, along with strict instructions to maintain her cover as an attorney, simply enjoying lunch while reviewing case notes. The private room door opened, and Sarah casually lifted her glass, using the movement to glance in that direction. Anthony Donovan emerged first, buttoning his suit jacket with the easy confidence of a man who knew his worth. Thornton followed, his expression carefully neutral, but Sarah caught the slight tension in his shoulders, the too-tight grip on his leather portfolio. They shook hands briefly before Donovan made his way to the exit, acknowledging other diners with polite nods as he passed. Thornton remained at the entrance of the private room for a moment longer, speaking quietly to the manager, likely settling the bill. As he turned to leave, his eyes swept across the restaurant and locked briefly with Sarah's before he quickly looked away. Sarah's heart rate spiked. Did he recognize her? Had her surveillance been too obvious? She forced herself to remain calm, returning her attention to her salad and case file as Thornton walked past her table toward the exit. Only after both men had left did she allow herself to relax slightly, finishing her meal at a natural pace before paying her bill and departing. Outside, she walked 2 blocks before slipping into a coffee shop and taking a seat in the back corner. She pulled out her phone and sent a message to the secure number Wilson had provided. Meeting concluded. 45 minutes total. Footage captured. T appeared tense upon exit. Possible recognition. The response came less than a minute later. Upload footage. Return to office as normal. Report at 1800. Sarah did as instructed, then gathered her things and headed back to her law office. As she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling of Thornton's eyes on her, that brief moment of recognition. If he had identified her as Marcus Reynolds' attorney, if he connected her to the federal investigation now underway. She pushed the thought aside. There was no going back now. Across town, Marcus was deep in the bowels of a panel van, installing a custom hydraulic system that would allow the vehicle's floor to split and reveal a hidden compartment large enough to transport several crates of weapons. The work was intricate and demanding, requiring precision and attention to detail, qualities that made him valuable to the Donovans and provided the perfect cover for his real purpose. As he worked, he maintained a constant awareness of his surroundings. 2 guards remained stationed near the entrance to the garage, occasionally glancing in his direction, but mostly focused on their phones. Grissom moved between the main warehouse and the garage, checking on his progress and providing additional specifications as needed. "How's it coming?" Grissom asked, approaching the van where Marcus lay on a mechanic's creeper beneath the chassis. "Almost done with the hydraulics," Marcus replied, sliding out to face him. "But there's a problem with the weight distribution. Load this compartment fully and the van will sit too low. Be obvious something's off." Grissom frowned. "Can you fix it?" "Need to upgrade the suspension. Not complicated, but I'll need parts." Marcus wiped his hands on a rag as he stood. "I made a list." He handed Grissom a piece of paper with various automotive parts listed in precise detail, all legitimate items that would indeed solve the weight distribution issue, but also create an opportunity for Marcus to leave the warehouse and connect with Wilson. Grissom scanned the list. "I'll have someone get these. How long will the installation take once you have them?" 4, maybe 5 hours, Marcus estimated, but it needs to be done right. These vans will be carrying valuable cargo through areas with heavy police presence. Last thing you want is to get pulled over because the vehicle looks suspicious. Agreed, Grissom nodded. I'll get you what you need. In the meantime, start on the SUV. Same modifications, but with the additional reinforcement we discussed. As Grissom walked away, Marcus returned to work, his mind processing everything he'd learned so far. The Donovans were preparing at least 6 vehicles for what appeared to be simultaneous transports. That suggested a major shipment being broken into smaller loads, a common tactic to minimize risk. If one vehicle was intercepted, the others might still get through. He'd also overheard fragments of conversation indicating the shipment would be moving through Chicago to distribution points in Detroit, Milwaukee, and possibly Canada. The schedule was tight, with all vehicles needing to be ready within 4 days. Whatever the Donovans were moving, it was happening soon. Hours passed as Marcus methodically worked on the vehicles, gathering information with each modification he made, each conversation he overheard. By late afternoon, Grissom returned with the parts Marcus had requested. "These should be everything," he said, dropping several boxes next to the workbench. "Anthony wants a progress report by tomorrow morning." "I'll have the first 2 vehicles completed by then," Marcus assured him. "Just need to pull an all-nighter." Grissom nodded approvingly. "That's the kind of dedication we appreciate, Smith. There'll be a bonus if you meet that deadline." After Grissom left, Marcus continued working for another hour before announcing to the guards that he needed to pick up additional tools from his shop. They exchanged glances, then one made a call, presumably to check if Marcus was allowed to leave. After a brief conversation, he nodded, and Marcus was escorted to his truck. 20 minutes later, Marcus pulled into the deserted parking lot of his auto shop. Instead of going inside, however, he walked to the convenience store across the street, purchased a coffee, and made his way to the back of the building where Wilson was waiting in an unmarked car. "We don't have much time," Marcus said as he slid into the passenger seat. "They'll get suspicious if I'm gone too long." Wilson handed him a small device. "This is a more advanced transmitter. It'll allow us to track the vehicles even if they sweep for traditional bugs. It embeds into the vehicle's electronic system, disguised as a standard component." Marcus examined it briefly before pocketing it. "I'll install them tonight." But that's not all. The shipment is bigger than we thought. Multiple vehicles, multiple destinations. Detroit, Milwaukee, possibly Toronto. Timeline? 4 days from now. Night operation based on the modifications they want. Special compartments, reinforced suspensions, blackout capabilities. Wilson processed this information. Weapons? Almost certainly. High-end, military grade, based on the specifications and security. I haven't seen the actual cargo yet, but everything points to a major arms deal. "This aligns with what Sarah uncovered," Wilson confirmed. "Thornton met with Anthony Donovan today. Our audio surveillance was limited, but we picked up references to ensuring smooth transit and appropriate legal coverage. Sounds like Thornton is helping coordinate police response, or lack thereof, for the shipment routes." Marcus nodded grimly. "The Donovans have always been thorough. It's why they've operated successfully for so long." He glanced at his watch. "I need to get back. The longer I'm gone, the more likely they are to check on me." "One more thing," Wilson said, handing Marcus a small flash drive. "This contains programs that can extract data from any computer systems you might access in the warehouse. If you can get this into one of their machines, even for a few minutes, it could give us valuable intelligence." Marcus tucked it into his boot. "I'll try, but security is tight. Don't count on it." As Marcus turned to leave, Wilson called after him. "Be careful. Sarah thought Thornton might have recognized her at the restaurant today. If he connects her to you, to us, then we're all compromised," Marcus finished the thought. "I know the risks." Back at the warehouse, Marcus worked through the night, methodically modifying the vehicles while strategically placing the trackers Wilson had provided. The guards changed shifts at midnight, giving him a brief window of slightly reduced surveillance to install the more sensitive equipment. By dawn, he had completed 2 of the vehicles to the Donovan's specifications, each now silently transmitting its location to the FBI. He was putting the finishing touches on the second van when Anthony Donovan arrived, looking fresh despite the early hour. "Impressive," Anthony remarked, circling the completed vehicles. "Grissom said you were good, but this exceeds expectations." "I take pride in my work," Marcus replied simply, wiping grease from his hands. Anthony ran his hand along the edge of the hidden compartment, testing its seamlessness. "Indeed you do, and we reward excellence." He pulled an envelope from his jacket and handed it to Marcus. "A bonus, as promised. There's more where that came from if you maintain this quality for all 6 vehicles." Marcus accepted the envelope with a nod of thanks, making no move to count the contents. "I'll have the others done on schedule." "I believe you will." Anthony studied him for a moment. "You know, Smith, I've been looking into your background. Army mechanic, honorable discharge, then private sector work. Impressive record, actually." Marcus kept his expression neutral, though his senses immediately went on high alert. This was no casual conversation. "Nothing special. Just did my job." "Always so modest." Anthony smiled, but his eyes remained calculating. "The thing is, there's a gap in your employment history. About 5 years where you seem to have disappeared. Care to explain that?" Marcus had prepared for this question long ago when he first created the Marcus Smith identity. His cover story was solid, backed by carefully crafted documentation and references that would stand up to scrutiny unless someone dug exceptionally deep. "Personal reasons," he answered, his tone indicating reluctance to discuss it. "My mother got sick. Cancer. I moved back to Georgia to take care of her until she passed. Worked cash jobs, auto repairs out of her garage to make ends meet." Anthony's eyes narrowed slightly. "And there would be records of this? Medical bills, a death certificate perhaps?" "Of course," Marcus replied evenly, "though I don't see what my family tragedy has to do with fixing your vehicles." For a tense moment, Anthony said nothing, just continued to study Marcus with that penetrating gaze. Then his expression relaxed into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just being thorough, Smith. In our business, trust must be earned." "Understood." Marcus nodded. "And I respect that. But I'm here to work, not to have my past dissected." Anthony seemed satisfied with this response. "Fair enough. Complete the remaining vehicles as scheduled, and we'll consider the matter closed." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Smith? Don't disappear on us again. We'd hate to have to come looking for you." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. As Anthony left the garage, Marcus returned to his work, his mind racing. The Donovans were investigating him, which meant they weren't fully convinced by his cover. He needed to accelerate his timetable, gather the crucial evidence before they discovered who he really was. Because if they did, Marcus Reynolds wouldn't just be facing a murder charge, he'd be facing execution. Sarah Chen slid her key card through the reader and entered the secure conference room at the FBI field office. Agent Wilson was already there, along with his superior, Special Agent in Charge Ellen Ramirez, and several analysts huddled around computer monitors displaying maps of Chicago with various routes highlighted in different colors. "Ms. Chen," Ramirez greeted her with a brisk nod. "Agent Wilson speaks highly of your contributions to this operation." "I'm just doing what needs to be done," Sarah replied, setting her briefcase on the table. "Any update on whether Thornton recognized me yesterday?" Wilson handed her a tablet displaying surveillance footage. Our facial recognition software analyzed his reaction when he spotted you. There was definite recognition, but we can't determine if he connected you to the Reynolds case specifically. Sarah studied the footage, watching Thornton's face as he glanced in her direction. The momentary widening of his eyes, the slight pause in his stride, subtle tells that might have meant nothing to an untrained observer but spoke volumes to those who knew what to look for. "He made me," she said with certainty. "The question is, what will he do about it?" "We've initiated surveillance on Thornton," Ramirez informed her. "Phone taps, email monitoring, physical tracking. If he communicates with the Donovans about you, we'll know." Sarah nodded, though the knot in her stomach tightened. "What about Marcus? Are the trackers working?" Wilson gestured to one of the analysts, who pulled up a different display showing 6 blinking dots clustered in a single location. "All operational. Reynolds has managed to plant devices in 4 vehicles so far. We're getting clear signals." "And the timeline?" Sarah asked. "Shipment moves in 2 days," Wilson replied. "Based on Reynolds' intelligence, the weapons will be loaded tomorrow night. Vehicles dispatched before dawn the following day. We're tracking multiple destinations across 3 states and potentially into Canada." Sarah moved to the map, studying the highlighted routes. "These are the projected transport paths?" "Based on what Reynolds has overheard and the documentation you recovered from Thornton's case files, yes," Ramirez confirmed. "The Donovans have chosen routes with minimal police presence thanks to Thornton's influence." "We're facing a decision point," Wilson added, his expression grim. "Do we move in now, with what we have, or wait to catch them in the act of transporting the weapons?" "The second option gives us a stronger case," Ramirez pointed out. "Charges of conspiracy are good, but catching them with military-grade weapons crossing state lines, that's federal time with no possibility of legal maneuvering." Sarah frowned. "But it also puts Marcus at greater risk. The longer he stays undercover, the more chance the Donovans have of discovering who he really is." "Reynolds knew the risks when he volunteered for this assignment," Ramirez said, though not unkindly. "His background in CIA operations makes him uniquely qualified to handle this situation." "His background also makes him a high-value target, if the Donovans realize who they're dealing with," Sarah countered. "They've already killed one informant and framed Marcus for it. What do you think they'll do if they discover he's former CIA working with the FBI?" The room fell silent as everyone contemplated this uncomfortable reality. Finally, Wilson spoke. "We proceed as planned. Reynolds will complete the vehicle modifications, place the remaining trackers, and extract before the weapons are loaded. We'll maintain surveillance and move in once the shipment is in transit." Ramirez nodded in agreement. "The warrants are ready. Once those weapons are on the move, we'll have everything we need to take down the entire Donovan organization, including their law enforcement accomplices." "And what about me?" Sarah asked. "If Thornton made me as surveillance, I could be compromised." Wilson and Ramirez exchanged glances. "We think you should continue your normal routine," Wilson said carefully. "Acting differently now would only confirm any suspicions, but we'll assign protective detail, discreet, at a distance." Sarah wasn't entirely satisfied with this plan, but she understood the logic. "Fine, but I want to be kept in the loop on everything. No keeping me in the dark for my own protection." "Agreed," Ramirez said, extending her hand to seal the deal. "Your insight into this case has been invaluable, Ms. Chen. We wouldn't have gotten this far without you." As the meeting concluded, Sarah gathered her files, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something, that the Donovans, who had managed to operate successfully for decades, wouldn't be taken down so easily. But what choice did they have? The opportunity to catch them red-handed with illegal weapons was too significant to pass up. Across town, Marcus was completing work on the 5th vehicle, a Suburban with reinforced suspension and hidden compartments in both the floor and side panels. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, but his mind was elsewhere, cataloging every scrap of information he'd gathered over the past few days. The Donovans were moving military-grade assault rifles, grenades, and possibly even short-range missiles, according to conversations he'd overheard. The buyers remained unnamed, but references to overseas clients suggested international terrorism connections. The stakes had escalated far beyond what he'd initially anticipated. "Looking good, Smith," Grissom commented, entering the garage with a pizza box in hand. "Thought you might be hungry." Marcus straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "Appreciate it." He accepted a slice, using the break to assess Grissom's demeanor. Something felt off. The man seemed tenser than usual, his casual attitude slightly forced. "Anthony's impressed with your work," Grissom continued, leaning against the workbench. "Says you're the best he's seen. High praise coming from him." Marcus took a bite of pizza, giving himself time to formulate a response. "Just doing what I was hired for." "Yeah, about that," Grissom said, his tone shifting subtly. "There's been a change of plans. The old man wants to move the schedule up. Shipments arriving tonight, not tomorrow." Marcus kept his expression neutral, despite the surge of adrenaline. "Tonight? I still have 2 vehicles to finish." "Just focus on this one," Grissom instructed, gesturing to the Suburban. "The 6th can wait. We need this one operational by 10 p.m. "That's tight but doable," Marcus replied, mentally adjusting his own timeline. He needed to alert Wilson about the schedule change, but with Grissom watching him more closely than usual, finding a secure moment to communicate would be challenging. "One more thing," Grissom added, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "The old man wants to meet with you personally after you finish. Says he has a special assignment he thinks you'd be perfect for." Warning bells rang in Marcus's mind. Michael Donovan didn't take personal interest in low-level operators unless they were being promoted or eliminated. Given the accelerated timeline and Grissom's subtle tension, Marcus suspected it wasn't a promotion on offer. Looking forward to it, he lied smoothly. As Grissom left, Marcus returned to work on the Suburban, his movements deliberate and focused despite the storm of calculations happening in his mind. The changed schedule indicated something had spooked the Donovans. Perhaps they'd received intelligence about federal interest in their operation, or one of their sources had warned them about potential surveillance. Either way, Marcus's window of opportunity was closing rapidly. He needed to complete the tracking installations, alert Wilson to the new timeline, and prepare for a potential emergency extraction if his cover was blown. 2 hours later, with the Suburban modifications nearly complete, Marcus deliberately snapped a specialized wrench while tightening a critical bolt. "Damn it," he muttered loudly enough for the guards to hear. He examined the broken tool with exaggerated frustration before approaching them. "Need to make a supply run. The tension wrench broke, and I can't finish without a replacement." The guard frowned. "Can't someone else get it?" "It's a specialized tool," Marcus explained with just the right amount of professional irritation. "I need a specific grade of steel for this application. Won't take long. There's a specialty shop 20 minutes from here." After a brief call to Grissom, who reluctantly authorized the trip with the condition that one of the guards accompany him, Marcus found himself driving toward downtown Chicago with an armed escort in his passenger seat. "Mind if we stop for coffee?" Marcus asked casually as they approached a busy intersection. "Been working straight through. Could use the caffeine." The guard shrugged. "Make it quick." Marcus pulled into a crowded Starbucks parking lot, selecting a spot near the entrance. "Well, what do you want? I'll grab it." "Black coffee, largest size," the guard replied, settling back in his seat. Marcus nodded and entered the cafe, joining the line of afternoon customers. As he waited, he pulled out his phone and sent a coded text message to Wilson's secure number. Timeline accelerated. Shipment tonight, 10 p.m. Suspicion elevated. Possible compromise. Proceed with caution. The response came back almost immediately. Understood. Maintain cover. Extraction team on standby. Marcus ordered the coffees and returned to the truck, his outward demeanor unchanged despite the growing certainty that he was walking back into an increasingly dangerous situation. At the specialty tool shop, he purchased a replacement wrench along with several other items to maintain the appearance of a legitimate supply run. Throughout the transaction, he remained hyper-aware of his surroundings, noting two men in a sedan parked across the street who seemed too interested in the store entrance. "We've got company," he murmured to himself as he returned to the truck. Whether they were Donovan surveillance or FBI backup was impossible to determine from a distance, but their presence confirmed his suspicions. The game was accelerating toward its conclusion. Back at the warehouse, Marcus completed the Suburban modifications with grim efficiency, installing the final tracker in a location that would be nearly impossible to detect even with sophisticated scanning equipment. By 9 p.m., the vehicle was ready, and Grissom returned to inspect the work. "Impressive as always, Smith," he commented, running his hand along the nearly invisible seam of the hidden compartment. "The old man will be pleased." "Happy to hear it," Marcus replied, cleaning his tools with methodical precision. "When does he want to meet?" "Now, actually," came a voice from the doorway. Michael Donovan entered the garage, flanked by two guards whose hands rested too casually near their concealed weapons. "I hope I'm not interrupting your work." Marcus straightened, wiping his hands clean. "Not at all, sir. Just finished." Michael approached, studying the Suburban with appreciative eyes. "Anthony tells me you've been asking questions about our operation, about the shipment, the destinations, the contents." Every muscle in Marcus's body tensed, though his expression remained neutral. "Just needed to know the weight specifications for the suspension adjustments. Different cargo requires different handling." Michael smiled, the expression never reaching his cold eyes. "Of course. Very professional of you." He circled the vehicle slowly. "You know, Smith, in my business, trust is everything. Without it, nothing works." "I understand that, sir." "Do you?" Michael stopped directly in front of him. "I wonder. You see, we conducted a more thorough background check on you. Very thorough. And we found some inconsistencies." Marcus remained still, mentally reviewing his extraction options. The garage had 3 exits. The main door, currently blocked by Grissom and a guard. The side entrance, where another guard was likely stationed, and a small maintenance door that led to an alley, potentially his best escape route. "What kind of inconsistencies?" he asked, his tone even. Michael's smile widened slightly. "The kind that make me question whether you're really who you claim to be." He reached into his jacket and removed not a weapon, as Marcus half expected, but a folded document which he handed over. "Perhaps you could explain this." Marcus unfolded the paper to find a death certificate for Margaret Smith, his supposed mother whose cancer battle had served as his cover for the 5-year gap in his employment history. According to the certificate, she had died 3 years before the date Marcus had claimed in his story. "Interesting reading, isn't it?" Michael said softly. "Almost as interesting as the fact that you bear a striking resemblance to a man named Marcus Reynolds, who was recently acquitted of murder charges under rather unusual circumstances." The trap had closed. Marcus kept his expression carefully neutral as he assessed his rapidly diminishing options. The Donovans knew, or at least strongly suspected, that he wasn't who he claimed to be. The question now was whether they had connected him to federal law enforcement or believed he was something else, perhaps a rival criminal organization's plant or a journalist seeking an exposé. "I think," Michael continued, his voice deadly calm, "that you and I need to have a very honest conversation, Smith. Or should I call you Reynolds?" Time slowed to a crawl as Marcus weighed his options. The garage had become a trap, with armed men blocking the exits and Michael Donovan watching him with the cold calculation of a predator about to strike. Fight-or-flight responses surged through his body, but 15 years of CIA training had taught him something more valuable than either: strategic patience. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Mr. Donovan," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "But I think there's been a misunderstanding." Michael chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "No misunderstanding, son. Just a simple question that requires a simple answer." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Who are you working for?" The question revealed something crucial. The Donovans suspected he was an infiltrator, but they weren't certain of his affiliation. This narrow gap of uncertainty might be his only leverage. "I work for myself," Marcus replied, maintaining eye contact. "Always have." "Is that so?" Michael gestured to Grissom, who produced a laptop and opened it to display surveillance footage. "Then perhaps you can explain this." The video showed Marcus meeting with Wilson in the convenience store parking lot 2 days earlier. The angle was poor, the figures slightly blurred, but the exchange of items was clearly visible. "You've been watching me," Marcus observed calmly, buying time as he assessed the security footage. The camera angle suggested it came from a position across the street, not the FBI's surveillance, which meant Wilson hadn't spotted it either. "We watch everyone who works for us," Michael stated flatly. "Standard procedure, especially for someone with unexplained gaps in their history." Marcus nodded slowly, a plan forming in his mind. Smart business practice. "So I'll ask again." Michael's voice hardened. "Who are you working for?" Marcus sighed, allowing his shoulders to slump slightly in apparent resignation. "You're right. I haven't been entirely honest with you." The tension in the room shifted, the guards exchanging glances as Michael's eyes narrowed. "Go on." "That man in the video is Vincent Kelso, Detroit operation." Marcus spoke the lies with perfect confidence, having constructed this contingency during his years working undercover. "I do some procurement work for them occasionally. Parts, tools, specialized equipment, nothing that would interfere with your business." Michael studied him, skepticism evident in his expression. "Detroit, you expect me to believe you're moonlighting for Kelso's crew while working for me?" "It's not like that," Marcus insisted, injecting just the right amount of defensive urgency into his voice. "The Detroit job was set before you hired me. One-time deal, just delivering some custom tools. I needed the money after the whole mess with the cops." Grissom stepped forward, his hand moving to his weapon. "He's lying, boss. Kelso's operation doesn't reach into Chicago. They know better." Marcus turned to him, his expression hardening. "Their tools do. Who do you think supplies half the chop shops in the Midwest? I'm not involved in their other business. I just fix things and keep my mouth shut." Michael raised a hand, silencing Grissom's retort. "And the death certificate? The discrepancy in your mother's death?" "A clerical error," Marcus replied without hesitation. "County records in rural Georgia aren't exactly state-of-the-art. The date's wrong on the official certificate. Happens more than you'd think." A heavy silence fell over the garage as Michael considered this explanation. Marcus maintained his relaxed posture despite every instinct screaming at him to move, to fight, to run. If the Donovans believed he was merely a mechanic with connections to another criminal organization, one not in direct competition with their own operations, he might still salvage the situation. Michael paced slowly, his Italian leather shoes clicking softly against the concrete floor. Finally, he turned back to Marcus. "Let's say I believe you about Kelso. That still doesn't explain why you look remarkably similar to Marcus Reynolds, the man recently acquitted of murder charges. Care to elaborate on that coincidence?" And there it was, the true threat to his cover. one that couldn't be explained away with convenient lies about rival criminal organizations. The Donovans had connected him to his real identity. "Not much to elaborate on," Marcus replied, deciding to embrace rather than deny the obvious. "It's me in those news reports. Reynolds is my legal name. Smith is what I use professionally. Keeps things separate." "Separate," Michael repeated skeptically. "And being framed for murder by a dirty cop who just happened to end up dead in his cell? That was just bad luck." "The worst kind," Marcus agreed, watching Michael's eyes for any sign of what the man was truly thinking. "Look, Mr. Donovan, I understand how this looks, but all I want is to put that nightmare behind me and get back to work. I don't know why that cop targeted me, and frankly, I don't care anymore. It's over." Michael exchanged a glance with Grissom, a silent communication passing between them. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "I believe you, Smith, or Reynolds, whatever you prefer to be called." The sudden shift was jarring, and Marcus knew immediately it was tactical rather than genuine. The Donovans hadn't survived this long by being easily fooled. "Smith is fine," Marcus replied cautiously. "Smith it is, then." Michael clapped him on the shoulder like they were old friends. "Now, I believe we have business to attend to. The shipment will be arriving within the hour, and I want you personally overseeing the loading process. Your attention to detail has impressed me." The invitation wasn't a reward, it was a test. If Marcus refused or appeared reluctant, it would confirm their suspicions. If he agreed, he would be present when the illegal weapons arrived, making him complicit in the operation and potentially exposing his connection to the FBI if a raid occurred. "I'd be honored," Marcus replied, recognizing the trap but seeing no alternative. "Excellent." Michael turned to Grissom. "Keep him company until the shipment arrives. I need to make some calls." As Michael left the garage, Grissom moved closer to Marcus, all pretense of friendliness gone. "Just so we're clear," he said quietly, "if you're not who you say you are, if you're working with the feds or anyone else who might cause problems for the family, you won't leave this warehouse alive." "Understood," Marcus replied evenly. "But I'm exactly who I say I am, a mechanic who wants to get paid and go home without complications." Grissom didn't look convinced, but he stepped back, gesturing toward the workbench. "Finish your preparations. The trucks will be here soon." At the FBI field office, alarm bells were literally ringing. The tracking devices Marcus had planted in the vehicles were showing movement, not on the roads as expected, but within the warehouse compound. "Something's happening," Wilson announced, rushing into the conference room where Sarah and Ramirez were reviewing case files. "The vehicles are being repositioned, likely for loading." Ramirez moved to the digital map display. "Earlier than expected. Are all the trackers operational?" "All 6 are transmitting," Wilson confirmed. "But Reynolds hasn't checked in with the schedule change, which is concerning." Sarah felt a chill of apprehension. His last message indicated elevated suspicion. What if his cover's been blown? Wilson's expression darkened. Then he's in serious danger. The Donovans don't ask questions twice. "We need to move now," Sarah insisted. "If Marcus is compromised—" "We move when we have confirmation," Ramirez interrupted firmly. "If Reynolds is still operational, a premature raid could not only blow his cover but potentially get him killed in the crossfire." "And if we wait too long?" Sarah challenged. Ramirez didn't answer directly. Instead, she turned to Wilson. "Prepare the tactical teams. I want them ready to move on my command. And get me eyes on that warehouse. Satellite, drone, whatever we can access immediately." As the room erupted into controlled chaos, Sarah pulled Wilson aside. "I know you have an extraction protocol for Marcus. What is it?" Wilson hesitated. "That's classified, Ms. Chen." "Cut the bureaucratic nonsense, Wilson," Sarah snapped, her patience evaporating. "If Marcus is in trouble, I need to know how we're supposed to help him." After a moment's consideration, Wilson relented. "Emergency signal comes from his watch, a specific frequency that triggers our immediate response. If he activates it, we go in, full tactical assault, no questions asked. And if he can't reach his watch?" Sarah pressed. "If he's being held at gunpoint or worse? Then we hope the trackers give us enough intel to move before it's too late," Wilson admitted grimly. Back at the warehouse, Marcus was caught in an increasingly dangerous game of psychological warfare. While his hands methodically prepared the vehicles for loading, checking hydraulic systems, and ensuring hidden compartments functioned properly, his mind raced through potential scenarios and escape routes. He'd managed to activate the emergency transmitter in his watch, a subtle movement disguised as adjusting his sleeve, but there was no way to know if the signal had successfully reached Wilson. Even if it had, the FBI would need time to mobilize a tactical response. Time he wasn't certain he had. The warehouse loading bay doors opened with a mechanical groan, revealing two unmarked semi-trucks backing slowly into position. Marcus watched as Grissom directed them. Noting the increased security presence, at least a dozen armed men now patrolled the perimeter, far more than the usual contingent. Anthony Donovan entered the garage, his expression tense as he approached Marcus. "The first shipment's here. I need you to supervise the loading personally. Make sure the weight distribution is correct for each vehicle." "Of course," Marcus replied, following Anthony to the loading bay where workers were already beginning to unload wooden crates from the first truck. One of the crates had been damaged in transit, its corners splintered to reveal the contents within, sleek black assault rifles with modifications that were definitely not civilian legal, military-grade weapons exactly as Marcus had suspected. "Careful with those," Anthony barked at the workers. "Each one is worth more than you make in a year." As Marcus directed the loading process, ensuring each vehicle was properly balanced, he mentally documented everything he observed: the number of crates, their dimensions, the visible weapons, the personnel involved. All valuable intelligence, assuming he lived long enough to relay it. Michael Donovan returned as the loading neared completion, observing the operation with evident satisfaction. He beckoned Marcus over with a deceptively friendly gesture. "Impressive work, Smith," he commented. "The compartments are virtually undetectable." "That's the idea," Marcus replied neutrally. Michael studied him for a moment longer, then said abruptly, "I received an interesting call just now, about you." Marcus's pulse quickened, though his expression remained impassive. "Is that right?" "Indeed. It seems your name, your real name, Reynolds, has been flagged in some very interesting databases." Michael's voice remained conversational, but his eyes had hardened to flint. Federal databases. The moment of truth had arrived. Marcus maintained eye contact, his mind calculating odds and options with cold precision. "Is that surprising? I was just acquitted of murder charges. I imagine my name is in plenty of federal systems." "These particular databases aren't accessible to ordinary law enforcement," Michael continued, his voice dropping lower. "They're the kind used by intelligence agencies, specifically the Central Intelligence Agency." A deadly silence fell between them as the implication hung in the air. Then Michael asked the question Marcus had been dreading. "Tell me, Mr. Reynolds, is it standard procedure for the CIA to frame innocent civilians for murder, only to dramatically reveal their involvement later? Or is your case special?" For half a second, Marcus considered continuing the charade, denying any connection to intelligence agencies, doubling down on his cover story. But the calculated look in Michael Donovan's eyes told him everything he needed to know. The man had concrete information, not mere suspicion. To continue lying would only confirm his hostile intent. Instead, Marcus did something unexpected. He laughed. The sound echoed through the warehouse, causing several workers to glance in their direction. Michael's expression flickered briefly with confusion, clearly not the reaction he had anticipated. "Mr. Donovan," Marcus said finally, his demeanor shifting subtly as he allowed some of his true self to emerge, "if you really believe I'm a CIA operative, why are we having this conversation? Why not just have your men eliminate me?" Michael studied him, intrigued rather than angered by the response. "An excellent question. Perhaps because I'm curious. Perhaps because killing a federal agent creates more problems than it solves. Or perhaps," he paused, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face, "because I see an opportunity." Now it was Marcus's turn to be confused, though he concealed it well. "What kind of opportunity?" "The kind that benefits us both," Michael replied smoothly. "You see, Mr. Reynolds, men with your particular skill set and background are rare and valuable. The kind of value that transcends conventional employer-employee relationships." Marcus remained silent, waiting for Michael to elaborate. "My sources tell me you left the agency 3 years ago. Not on the best of terms, I understand." Michael smiled thinly. "They abandoned you, didn't they? Left you to fend for yourself when things got complicated, and now suddenly they need you again to clean up a mess they could have prevented." The statement wasn't entirely true, but it contained enough truth to be credible. Marcus's departure from the CIA had indeed been complicated, his transition to civilian life less supported than it should have been. "Your point?" Marcus asked, his tone neutral. "My point is that loyalty should be reciprocal," Michael replied. "The federal government used you, then discarded you, then came calling when it was convenient for them. I'm offering you something better, a genuine partnership based on mutual benefit and respect." Marcus raised an eyebrow, maintaining the appearance of someone genuinely considering the offer. "And what exactly would this partnership entail?" Before Michael could respond, Anthony approached them, his expression tense. "The loading is complete, Father. We need to discuss the route changes before dispatch." Michael nodded, his eyes still fixed on Marcus. "We'll continue this conversation shortly. In the meantime, I trust you'll remain our guest." He gestured subtly, and 2 armed guards positioned themselves near Marcus, not overtly threatening, but clearly intended to ensure he didn't leave. As the Donovans moved away to consult with their lieutenants, Marcus assessed his situation. The weapons were loaded, the vehicles ready to depart. His emergency signal had been sent, but there was no way to know if the FBI was in position or still preparing for the raid. If the vehicles left before Wilson's team arrived, the evidence would be dispersed across multiple states, significantly complicating the federal case against the Donovans. At the FBI field office, controlled chaos had erupted. Wilson barked orders as tactical teams geared up, analysts monitored the tracking signals from the warehouse, and Ramirez coordinated with other law enforcement agencies to establish roadblocks and intercept positions. "Signal confirmation from Reynolds' emergency transmitter," an analyst called out. "Received approximately 14 minutes ago." "Why weren't we notified immediately?" Ramirez demanded. "The signal was degraded, ma'am. Had to verify it wasn't a false positive." Wilson turned to Ramirez. "That's our green light. Reynolds is in trouble. We need to move now." "Agreed." Ramirez nodded grimly. "All teams, prepare for immediate assault. Primary objective is securing the weapons and apprehending the Donovans. Secondary objective is extracting our operatives safely." Sarah, who had been monitoring the situation from a corner of the command center, approached Wilson. "I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not," Wilson replied immediately. "This is a high-risk tactical operation. You're a civilian." "I'm also the only person here who knows the full legal implications of everything we're doing," Sarah countered. "If anything goes wrong, if evidence is mishandled, if procedures aren't followed exactly, the entire case could collapse. You need me there." Wilson hesitated, clearly torn between operational security and the legitimate concerns Sarah raised. "She stays in the command vehicle," Ramirez interjected, making the decision. "No arguments, Ms. Chen. You provide legal counsel from a safe distance. That's the only offer on the table." Sarah nodded, accepting the compromise. "Thank you." As the tactical teams deployed, Sarah pulled Wilson aside one last time. "There's something else you should know. I received a tip from a clerk in Thornton's office. He's meeting with the elder Donovan tonight, off the books. If he's there when you raid the warehouse, and we'll have the corrupt ADA and the crime boss in one sweep," Wilson finished, seeing the implication. "Good work, Chen." In the warehouse, Marcus observed the final preparations for the shipment's departure. Drivers were being briefed, routes confirmed, contingency plans established. The operation was professional, methodical. These weren't street thugs, but organized criminals with military-like precision. His guards maintained their positions nearby, alert but not overly aggressive. They clearly believed the warehouse was secure, that Marcus was contained. A reasonable assumption under normal circumstances, but they didn't know what Marcus knew, that an FBI tactical team was likely already positioned outside, preparing to breach. The question was timing. If Marcus could delay the shipment's departure by even 10 minutes, it would give Wilson's team a better chance of catching the Donovans with the weapons still on site. Michael Donovan returned, his conversation with Anthony apparently concluded. "Walk with me, Mr. Reynolds," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Marcus complied, the guards falling into step behind them as Michael led him to a small office overlooking the warehouse floor. "Let me be direct," Michael said once the door closed behind them. "I know exactly who and what you are. Former CIA operative specialized in deep cover operations against domestic targets with international connections. Retired, or should I say retired, 3 years ago after a particularly difficult assignment in Eastern Europe. Recruited by the FBI specifically for this operation after Detective Mercer's unfortunate attempt to frame you." The level of detail was disturbing. Someone with high-level access to classified information had been feeding the Donovans intelligence on Marcus's background. "Impressive research," Marcus commented, neither confirming nor denying the assessment. "Not research, inside information." Michael's smile was cold. "You see, Mr. Reynolds, your federal agencies aren't as secure as they believe. People can be bought, information can be acquired, loyalties can shift, which brings me back to my offer." "I'm listening," Marcus replied, calculating how much longer he needed to stall. "Join us," Michael said simply. "Not as an employee, but as a partner. Your skills, your knowledge of federal operations, combined with our resources and connections, we could expand beyond anything currently imaginable." "And if I refuse?" Michael shrugged. "Then this conversation ends less pleasantly, but I don't think you will refuse. Because deep down, you know I'm right about how the government used you, about how they'll continue to use you until you're no longer valuable, then discard you again. With us, you'd have respect, wealth, power, all the things they promised, but never delivered." It was a tempting narrative, one crafted to appeal to the disillusioned federal agent Michael believed Marcus to be. And in another life, under different circumstances, perhaps it might have worked. But Michael had miscalculated in one crucial aspect. He assumed Marcus's motivation was personal gain rather than justice. Before Marcus could respond, a commotion erupted on the warehouse floor. One of the guards burst into the office without knocking, his expression urgent. "Sir, we have a problem. Thornton just arrived, says there's been a leak. The feds are onto the shipment." Michael's expression darkened as he turned to Marcus, the facade of civility evaporating. "It seems our negotiation has been cut short." Through the office window, Marcus saw Richard Thornton enter the warehouse, moving quickly toward Anthony, with clear agitation. Behind him, another man entered, a face Marcus recognized immediately, though he carefully controlled his reaction. Special Agent Thomas Wilson in plain clothes, but unmistakable to someone who knew him. Wilson's presence could mean only one thing. The FBI operation had been compromised, and he had infiltrated the warehouse personally, likely to attempt an emergency extraction. It was a desperate move, one that put Wilson at extreme risk. "Interesting," Michael murmured, watching the scene below. "It appears we have more guests than expected." He turned to the guard. "Secure Thornton and his companion. I want to know exactly what they know and how they know it." As the guard left, Michael returned his attention to Marcus. "I'm disappointed, Mr. Reynolds. I thought we might have had an understanding." "There was never going to be an understanding between us, Donovan," Marcus replied, dropping all pretense. "You're a weapons trafficker supplying terrorists with the means to kill innocent people. That's not something I can overlook for any amount of money or power." Michael sighed as if genuinely regretful. "A shame. You could have been so valuable." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a sleek pistol, aiming it casually at Marcus's chest. "I suppose we'll have to conclude our business more conventionally." Below, chaos erupted as several guards surrounded Wilson and Thornton. The corrupt prosecutor was shouting explanations, clearly panicked, while Wilson maintained a calm demeanor, his hands raised non-threateningly. But Marcus could see Wilson's eyes scanning the warehouse, likely looking for him. "Your colleague is quite bold," Michael observed. "Coming in alone like that, brave but foolish." "Who says he's alone?" Marcus replied. The question hung in the air for a split second before the answer came in the form of a deafening explosion as the warehouse's main doors were breached by an FBI tactical team. Flashbang grenades detonated in quick succession, filling the open space with blinding light and disorienting sound. Michael's reaction was instant. He lunged forward, grabbing Marcus by the collar and pressing the pistol to his temple. "Insurance!" he growled, using Marcus as a shield as he backed toward a door at the rear of the office. Below, the warehouse had descended into chaos. FBI agents in tactical gear poured through the breached entrance, taking cover behind vehicles and equipment as the Donovan's guards opened fire. Anthony was shouting orders, attempting to organize a defense, while Thornton cowered behind a stack of crates. Wilson had disappeared in the confusion, either taking cover or moving to secure another area. "This doesn't end well for you, Donovan," Marcus said calmly despite the gun at his head. "Your organization is finished. Your son is about to be arrested. Your weapons shipment is seized. It's over." "Nothing is over until I say it's over," Michael snarled, dragging Marcus toward the exit. "And you're going to ensure I walk out of here a free man." As they reached the door, Marcus knew his window of opportunity was narrowing. The FBI wouldn't risk firing on Michael while he was using him as a hostage, but if Donovan managed to escape with him, the situation would become infinitely more complicated. It was time to act. Drawing on years of CIA training, Marcus prepared to make his move, a calculated risk, but one he had to take, because sometimes in the field the only way forward was through the fire. The door behind them crashed open. The door crashed open, and Sarah Chen stood there, a confiscated pistol gripped in her hands with the stance of someone who'd had basic firearms training, but limited field experience. "Let him go, Donovan," she demanded, her voice remarkably steady despite the situation. Michael's grip on Marcus tightened, the barrel of his gun pressing harder against Marcus's temple. Well, the lawyer. "I have to admit, I didn't see that coming." His voice remained calm, calculating even in crisis. "But you're making a serious mistake, Ms. Chen. Put the gun down before you get yourself and Mr. Reynolds killed." Sarah's eyes flicked briefly to Marcus, seeking guidance. In that split second of distraction, Michael shifted his aim from Marcus toward her, the exact opening Marcus had been waiting for. With a swift, practiced movement born from thousands of hours of training, Marcus struck, driving his elbow hard into Michael's solar plexus while simultaneously twisting the older man's wrist to break his grip on the pistol. The weapon clattered to the floor as Michael doubled over, gasping for breath. Marcus immediately followed with a precise strike to the base of Michael's skull, rendering him unconscious before he could recover. "Nice timing," Marcus said to Sarah as he secured Michael's hands with zip ties from his pocket. "Though I'm pretty sure Wilson told you to stay in the command vehicle." "He did," Sarah confirmed, lowering the gun with visible relief. "But when Thornton showed up with Wilson, I knew something had gone wrong with the plan. Nobody was watching me, so I followed the tactical team in." "Remind me to thank you properly when we're not in the middle of a firefight," Marcus replied, retrieving Michael's pistol and checking the corridor. "We need to get downstairs. Wilson's out there somewhere and Anthony is still at large." Sarah nodded, her professional composure returning now that the immediate danger had passed. "What about him?" She gestured toward the unconscious Michael Donovan. "He'll keep," Marcus replied. "The FBI will secure him once they clear the building. Right now, our priority is helping end this with minimal casualties." They moved cautiously through the corridor, the sounds of gunfire and shouted commands echoing from the warehouse floor below. As they reached a stairwell overlooking the main area, Marcus assessed the situation quickly. The FBI tactical team had secured most of the warehouse, with several Donovan associates already handcuffed and kneeling on the ground. Richard Thornton was among them, his expensive suit now dirty and torn, his face a mask of panicked resignation. Across the floor, Wilson was pinned down behind a shipment crate, exchanging fire with Anthony Donovan and two guards who had taken position behind one of the modified SUVs. "Cover me," Marcus instructed Sarah, handing her Michael's pistol. "Just suppressive fire. Aim at the vehicle, not the people. I'm going to flank them." Before Sarah could protest, Marcus was moving, using the confusion and smoke as cover as he circled behind the shipping containers toward Anthony's position. Sarah, after a moment's hesitation, began firing occasional shots at the SUV, forcing Anthony and his men to keep their heads down. Wilson spotted Marcus's movement and immediately understood the plan, increasing his own rate of fire to maintain Anthony's attention on the front. The coordinated effort worked. Anthony was so focused on the threats he could see that he failed to secure his rear position. Marcus approached silently, years of CIA fieldcraft allowing him to move undetected despite the chaos. When he was less than 10 feet from Anthony's position, he called out, "It's over, Anthony. Your father is in custody, your men are surrendering, and the weapons are seized. Don't make this worse than it already is." Anthony whirled around, his expression contorted with rage and disbelief. "You," he snarled, raising his weapon toward Marcus. "You did this." "Final warning," Marcus replied calmly. "Drop the weapon." For a moment, it seemed Anthony might choose the suicidal option of trying to shoot his way out. But as FBI agents surrounded the position from all sides, the last embers of resistance died in his eyes. With a curse, he dropped his pistol and raised his hands. "This isn't over, Reynolds," Anthony spat as agents moved in to handcuff him. "Actually, it is," Marcus replied. "Completely over." Within minutes, the gunfire had ceased entirely. The warehouse was secure, the weapons recovered, and the Donovans, both father and son, in federal custody along with most of their organization. Richard Thornton, looking shell-shocked and diminished, was led away in handcuffs, his career and freedom forfeit for his role in the criminal enterprise. Wilson approached Marcus and Sarah, holstering his weapon with a grimace that suggested he was nursing an injury. "You're hit," Marcus observed, noting the dark stain spreading on Wilson's left sleeve. "Just a graze," Wilson dismissed, though his pallor suggested otherwise. "Nothing compared to what I'm going to do to you, Chen, for disobeying direct orders." Sarah smiled, unrepentant. "You can thank me later. If I hadn't followed you in, Marcus might be leaving this warehouse in a body bag instead of on his own 2 feet." Wilson sighed, then reluctantly extended his uninjured hand to Sarah. "Good work, both of you." As medical personnel and additional FBI agents flooded the warehouse, the full scale of what they'd accomplished began to take shape. 6 vehicles loaded with military-grade weapons, documented connections to international buyers, financial records seized from the Donovan's office. It was the kind of case federal prosecutors dreamed about. "How did Thornton know about the raid?" Marcus asked Wilson, as paramedics examined his minor injuries. "He didn't, not specifically," Wilson explained. "One of his contacts in the Bureau noticed unusual activity, tactical teams mobilizing, warrant requests being expedited. He panicked, came to warn the Donovans, not realizing he was walking into an active operation. And you followed him in alone?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That was reckless," says the man who just took down Michael Donovan in hand-to-hand combat, Wilson retorted. "I saw an opportunity for real-time intelligence and took it. Didn't expect the breach to happen quite so quickly." Marcus shook his head, but there was a hint of respect in his expression. "Well, it worked out, mostly." "That's the job," Wilson replied with a shrug, wincing as the movement aggravated his wound. "Speaking of which, we need to discuss your future." "My future?" "Your testimony will be crucial in the case against the Donovans," Sarah interjected, joining the conversation. "But it also means revealing your CIA background publicly." Marcus considered this. "My cover was blown anyway, and after tonight, I doubt I could return to a quiet life as a mechanic." "Which is why I wanted to discuss options," Wilson said. "The Bureau could use someone with your skills and experience, Reynolds, not just for this case, but permanently." Marcus looked surprised. "You're offering me a job after I just completed one forced recruitment?" "Not forced," Wilson corrected. "Offered, with full benefits, official status, and a clean slate. Your record expunged, your past with the CIA properly documented rather than hidden. No more living in the shadows." It was a tempting proposition. After years of operating undercover, of maintaining false identities and keeping everyone at arm's length, the idea of working openly, with legal authority and institutional support, had undeniable appeal. "I'll think about it," Marcus said finally. Wilson nodded, accepting the non-commitment. "Take your time, but not too much time. The Donovans will be arraigned within 48 hours, and will need to prepare for the preliminary hearings." As Wilson was called away to coordinate with the evidence response team, Sarah moved closer to Marcus. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I think you'd be good at it. The legitimate side of law enforcement could use someone who understands the gray areas." Marcus studied her for a moment. "And what about you? Back to regular cases now that the excitement is over?" "Hardly," Sarah laughed. "I've been offered a special appointment to the U.S. Attorney's Office, specifically to help prosecute the Donovans and their associates. Apparently, my unusual investigative approach impressed the right people." "Congratulations," Marcus said sincerely. "They're lucky to have you." "We'd be working together," Sarah pointed out, "if you take Wilson's offer." The implication hung between them, neither entirely professional nor entirely personal. Something had formed between them during this case, a connection, a mutual respect, perhaps something more. "Another point in favor of saying yes," Marcus acknowledged with a small smile. 3 months later, the Chicago Federal Courthouse was packed beyond capacity as the most significant organized crime trial in the city's recent history entered its second week. Michael and Anthony Donovan sat at the defense table, their once imposing presence diminished by prison jumpsuits and the weight of overwhelming evidence against them. At the prosecution table, Sarah Chen conferred quietly with her colleagues from the U.S. Attorney's Office, her confidence and command of the courtroom having grown remarkably in the months since the warehouse raid. She had emerged as one of the lead prosecutors, her intimate knowledge of the case making her invaluable to the government's efforts. Marcus Reynolds entered the courtroom through a side door, drawing all eyes as he walked to the witness stand. Dressed in a sharp suit with the subtle bulge of a service weapon visible beneath his jacket, he cut a different figure from the man who had once stood accused in a different courtroom. As he was sworn in, his eyes briefly met Sarah's, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Then his attention turned to the jury as the prosecutor began his questioning. Special Agent Reynolds, please explain to the jury your involvement in the investigation of the Donovan criminal organization. Marcus leaned slightly toward the microphone. It began when I was framed for murder by a corrupt police detective working for the Donovans. His testimony over the next 3 days was meticulous, detailed, and devastating to the defense. He explained his background with the CIA, his recruitment by the FBI, and the elaborate operation that had led to the Donovans' arrest. The defense attorneys tried repeatedly to discredit him, to paint him as an untrustworthy government operative with questionable methods, but Marcus remained unshakable. By the time the trial concluded 2 weeks later, the verdict was almost a foregone conclusion. The Donovans were convicted on all counts, facing sentences that would ensure neither would ever walk free again. Richard Thornton and several other corrupt officials received substantial prison terms for their roles in the organization. Outside the courthouse, after the verdicts were read, Marcus stood on the steps beside Sarah and Wilson, watching as the media swarmed around the U.S. attorney who was delivering an official statement. "Was it worth it?" Sarah asked quietly. Marcus considered the question. Justice for Gregory Washington, the Donovans behind bars, a major weapons shipment kept off the streets, I'd say so. And on a personal level, she pressed, you gave up your anonymity, exposed your past. There's no going back to a quiet life now. Marcus smiled, the expression more genuine than it had been in years. Maybe I don't want a quiet life. Maybe this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. As reporters began approaching them for comments, Wilson stepped forward to intercept, giving Marcus and Sarah a moment longer together. "Dinner tonight?" Marcus asked. "To celebrate?" Sarah's smile matched his own. "Definitely, though I think this is just the beginning." "The beginning," Marcus agreed. "I like the sound of that." As they turned to face the cameras and the questions, Marcus Reynolds, no longer a mechanic in hiding, no longer a spy in the shadows, but a man who had found his place in the light, felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The simple, profound satisfaction of standing on the right side of justice. The man the police had tried to frame had not only cleared his name, but had brought down an entire criminal empire in the process. And that, more than anything, was a story worth telling.